We are cracking open the files on Mark Rathbun, a man who was, for decades, really the highest internal security officer within one of the most controversial organizations in the world.
And this isn't just a biography. I think we need to be clear about that. This is a forensic reconstruction.
Yes, a journey from being the chief architect of institutional violence to a key whistleblower exposing those exact mechanisms, and then in this confounding and disturbing final act, perhaps reversing course entirely.
Our mission today is focused entirely on the source material. We have an exhaustive criminological report that draws on sworn affidavits, court records, and critically, Rathbun's own public admissions.
So this lets us do a minute-by-minute breakdown.
Exactly. A breakdown of the criminal context and the specific actions he oversaw as the Inspector General of the Religious Technology Center, the RTC. We're analyzing a system where internal law completely, and I mean completely, superseded civil law.
And that's the critical takeaway for you listening. This is a vital case study in institutional criminology. We're looking at how a criminogenic environment isn't an accident.
No, it's actively built.
It's actively built within these high-control groups. And when you grant absolute authority to people like Rathbun, that system affects everyone. The perpetrator, the victim, and, the legal system that just struggle to police a private, total institution.
Well, what's fascinating here is defining that environment. We are looking at a total institution, and it's typified by the C organization, which is the quasi-military core of the church.
The billion-year contract.
Billion-year contracts. I mean, just think of the legal and psychological implications of that. This commitment, it's part theological, part contractual. It creates this profound isolation from the outside world.
A closed society.
It establishes a closed society where normal ethical and legal boundaries just erode completely. And that's what legitimizes this extra legal enforcement against both internal dissent and external critics.
And Rathbun wasn't just in that system. He was at the very top of its internal security command structure.
Precisely. Rathbun was, functionally the organization's chief executioner. He was the ultimate arbiter of orthodoxy and the primary enforcer of David Miscavige's will.
So not just a manager.
Oh, no. He wasn't just managing paper. He was coordinating these sophisticated, often criminal, offensive strategies against external targets. And as we're going to get into, he was personally administering physical discipline against high-ranking subordinates who dared to fail. We have to see him as a singular case of near-absolute, unchecked authority.
Okay, so let's start with the historical context of his career, because the timing of when he joined really sets the tone for everything that follows. He came in around 1978.
Right after the huge, highly publicized, and frankly devastating FBI raids of 1977.
That timing is foundational, isn't it?
It's absolutely foundational. Those raids, they resulted from this operation known as Operation Snow White.
Which involves some pretty serious illegal activities.
Oh, significant. We're talking about wiretapping, document theft from the U.S. government, L. Ron Hubbard's own wife, Mary Sue Hubbard, and 10 other members of their covert operations branch, the Guardian's Office, or GEO, were convicted and went to prison.
So was Rathbun brought in as part of the post-scandal cleanup crew? Is that the idea?
Nominally, yes. He was part of the new guard that was brought in to, appear to clean up the church's public image, to get rid of the criminal elements of the old guard.
But the mission wasn't really to stop the operations.
No. The underlying mission was not to stop offensive operations. It was to professionalize them, to centralize them under this new, clean-sounding guise of intellectual property protection. And that led to the creation of the Religious Technology Center, or RTC.
Right, the RTC. Officially, it's all about holding trademarks and copyrights for the core religious technology. But the source material makes it abundantly clear this thing was basically a massive internal affairs and intelligence agency.
It's wrapped in a legal wrapper, and that structural ambiguity is the key to the criminogenic environment. As Inspector General, Rathbun reported only to David Miscavige, the leader. Think about that. He had zero accountability to any board, any ethics officer, any normal management structure.
His authority was absolute?
Completely. He could bypass the entire chain of command to investigate, to discipline, or to just summarily remove any staff member, didn't matter what their rank was, all under the justification that they were somehow corrupting the religious technology.
And if you have that kind of centralized, unchecked power, the ethical system becomes entirely internal. It just refers to itself.
Which leads us directly to the foundational policy that really defines every single action Rathbun took, the doctrine of fair game.
Fair game. This is the central mechanism, right?
It authorizes all the subsequent alleged criminal activity. It started as a written policy from L. Ron Hubbard, and it stated that perceived enemies, who they labeled suppressive persons, or SPS, could be, and this is a direct quote, tricked, sued, or lied to, or destroyed.
But didn't they officially cancel the name? For PR reasons?
Yes, the term was officially canceled back in the late 1960s, but the sources we have confirm the operational philosophy remained entirely intact. They just relabeled it dealing with an SP.
And that distinction is critical.
It's so critical for understanding the legal strategy Rathbun later perfected. The cancellation allowed them to argue in court that the policy didn't exist, while at the same time authorizing its full implementation internally.
So functionally, the policy provided theological and administrative authorization for what any court would consider criminal acts.
Absolutely. If your internal law views critics as destroyable enemies, then, destroying evidence, harassing families, engaging in surveillance, that's not seen as obstruction of justice or battery. It's just a successful defensive maneuver. And it's authorized by the organization's own theology. This concept is what defines Rathbun's entire career, first as a mastermind, and later, tragically, as its target.
Okay, let's jump into the period where Rathbun was at his operational peak. From the late 80s through the early 2000s, he was the organization's fixer.
Right. He was the guy they sent in to neutralize major external threats using these aggressive, systematic, and often extra-legal tactics. A true warrior for the organization.
And this is where we see a shift from just basic harassment to something more sophisticated.
Highly sophisticated institutional criminality, a practice often referred to as lawfare. They moved beyond simple picketing and started using the U.S. legal system itself, lawyers, courts, private investigators, as weapons of mass financial and reputational destruction.
And the first, and maybe the most crucial external threat he and Miscavige took on was the IRS.
The Internal Revenue Service in the early 1990s, the goal was massive, regaining the highly valuable federal tax-exempt status that they had lost years before.
And the source material calls this an all-out conflict.
It was. The legal and intelligence strategy was unprecedented. It went so far beyond standard appeals or even political lobbying. Rathbun and Miscavige coordinated this massive parallel campaign of private investigation targeting high-ranking IRS officials.
And at the same time, they were filing lawsuits.
Thousands of lawsuits. Some reports estimate the number is in the low four figures, and they were designed explicitly to paralyze the agency through sheer volume and, discovery costs.
So, explain the PI work. What exactly were they looking for? Why were they investigating IRS agents personally?
They were applying the operational philosophy of fair game directly to federal employees. The PI work was a forensic deep dive into the lives of these officials, including their immediate families.
Looking for dirt.
Looking for anything. Financial vulnerabilities, checking the tax status of relatives, looking for any history of substance abuse, marital infidelity, anything that could be weaponized or used as leverage. The goal wasn't just information, it was compromise.
So the strategy was to drown the agency in legal work while gathering enough compromising material to force a negotiation.
Precisely. And the criminological significance here is the application of these tactics against the government itself. The surveillance, the background checks on federal employees, they were designed to manufacture crippling leverage.
And Rathbun was in the room for the final negotiation.
He personally attended the pivotal meeting with IRS Commissioner Fred T. Goldberg Jr. in 1991. And the sources indicate that the aggressive use of this manufactured leverage was instrumental in forcing the IRS to eventually capitulate.
And they granted the tax exemption in 1993.
They did, and internally, this victory cemented Rathbun's status. He had won an impossible war through pure aggressive tactics. It proved to Miscavige that Rathbun could wield the organization's massive resources to defeat any enemy, even the most powerful taxing authority in the world. It validated everything they had done.
Okay, so if the IRS war was about regaining status, the Campaign Against the Cult Awareness Network, or CAN, was a campaign of organizational assassination.
Oh, CAN was the primary external antagonist. It was a nonprofit that provided information and support to families who were concerned about high control groups.
And the methods used here, this was a masterclass in what you called lawfare.
A masterclass in strategic lawfare designed purely for financial attrition. Rathbun oversaw a systematic strategy of vexatious litigation. That's a legal term for lawsuits filed maliciously, purely to harass or cause expense rather than to actually win on the merits.
So how do they execute that?
Rathbun coordinated the filing of just numerous lawsuits against CAN, often by individual Scientologists alleging discrimination or abuse. And a lot of these lawsuits were weak legally, but they didn't need to win.
You just needed to generate legal bills.
Exactly. An unstoppable volume of legal bills. CAN was a small nonprofit. They couldn't possibly sustain the cost of continually defending against dozens of simultaneous lawsuits.
And the final blow is an example of just profound institutional ruthlessness.
It is truly shocking in its cynicism. After years of this sustained financial pressure, a massive judgment against CAN, which actually stemmed from a case that wasn't even related to Scientology, forced it into bankruptcy.
But Rathbun's strategy went one step further.
He oversaw the maneuver where Scientology-affiliated entities showed up at the bankruptcy auction, and they purchased the CN name, the logo, the hotline number, and all the mailing lists.
So they didn't just silence their greatest critic, they consumed it and weaponized it.
Exactly. Rathbun later admitted that this action effectively turned their biggest critic into a front group. I mean, think of the emotional trauma. Desperate families are calling a hotline for help about high-control groups, and they are unknowingly connected directly to Scientologists. The institutional motive here wasn't just silencing a voice, it was absorbing it entirely for intelligence gathering and PR manipulation.
Unbelievable. So next on the list of targets, Robert Minton, a multimillionaire investment banker. He was providing crucial financial support to critics.
And this operation shows a clear shift toward coercion and, frankly, extortion in the late 1990s.
It was a coordinated intelligence operation.
Run by Rathbun and Mike Rinder, who was then the head of the Office of Special Affairs, or OSA. Their primary goal was to find a lever something Minton cared about more than funding critics. So they directed PIs to conduct these deep forensic financial investigations into his history.
And they were looking for something specific.
They were looking for irregularities in his international business dealings, including his investments in Nigeria.
And this investigation, it worked. It yielded the leverage they needed.
It did. The sources confirm that in 2009, Mike Rinder admitted that they found sensitive information Minton was worried about. This information was then used explicitly as coercion, or what Rathbun perfected as institutional extortion, to force a private, confidential settlement.
So Minton just stopped.
He reached a settlement because there were things that really he was worried about, and that effectively neutralized the multi-million-dollar financial threat he posed to the organization.
And beyond the financial leverage, Minton was also subjected to the classic physical provocation tactics of fair game.
Absolutely. The operation wasn't only white-collar. He was subjected to constant aggressive picketing at his private home and his business by organized teams of Scientologists.
And this wasn't just about annoyance.
No, the confrontations were explicitly designed to provoke Minton into a physical reaction, a shove, a punch, anything that would lead to his arrest. The manufactured arrest would then be used to destroy his reputation and legal standing through negative media. Rathbun's genius lay in his ability to perfectly blend sophisticated financial crimes with this kind of grassroots, in-your-face harassment.
Okay, we have to transition now to the darkest phase of Rathbun's executive career.
Yeah.
Because here the allegations shift dramatically from financial and harassment crimes to felony obstruction of justice and arguably criminal negligence contributing to a death. We need to do a detailed forensic examination of the case of Lisa McPherson.
This chapter is absolutely critical because it illustrates the horrifying consequences when a total institution prioritizes internal protocol over human life and civil law. Lisa McPherson's death and the subsequent cover-up were managed by Rathbun, who ensured the organization evaded criminal liability by destroying key evidence.
So let's start at the beginning. Who was Lisa McPherson and what happened on November 18, 1995?
Lisa McPherson was a 36-year-old dedicated long-term Scientologist, a Sea Org member. On November 18, 1995, in Clearwater, Florida, she was involved in a minor traffic accident.
And after the accident, she had some kind of breakdown.
A severe psychological break. Specifically, she started removing her clothes in the street. Paramedics arrived and were attempting to take her to a hospital for psychiatric evaluation.
But that's a red line for the organization.
An absolute red line. Scientologists on the scene intervened, and they checked her out of the hospital against medical advice. The internal law of the organization absolutely mandates the rejection of outside psychiatric intervention, which they consider abusive. So instead, she was taken to the Flag Service Organization headquarters, the Fort Harrison Hotel in Clearwater.
And she was held there in isolation for 17 days. We need to detail the conditions of her confinement in room 174. This is central to the negligent homicide claims.
She was confined to room 174. Officially, this was framed as a religious ritual, the introspection rundown, which is supposed to be for psychotic breaks. But this wasn't treatment, it was isolation. For 17 days, she was forcibly held, often physically restrained, and denied any access to external medical care, despite staff logs detailing her rapid physical and mental decline.
The specifics of her decline, according to the autopsy reports summarized in the sources, they're essential here.
They are graphic and very disturbing. By the end of her confinement, she was profoundly malnourished and severely dehydrated. She had extensive bruising all over her body, attributed either to self-harm or to aggressive physical restraint by the staff.
And she became catatonic.
She was reduced to a catatonic state, unable to eat or drink. On December 5th, 1995, she was rushed not to a local Clearwater hospital, but to a distant facility in Newport Richey.
Why so far away?
It was an alleged attempt to bypass the jurisdiction of the Pinellas County Medical Examiner.
And she died en route.
She did. The cause of death was attributed to a pulmonary embolism, which was linked directly to severe dehydration and enforced prolonged bed rest. The medical facts are clear. She died from a combination of neglect and confinement.
Now, Rathbun was not present during the confinement, but he was immediately flown in to manage the fallout. The sources identify his actions here as the core of the felony obstruction of justice allegations.
This is the moment Rathbun transitions from managing lawfare to managing a criminal conspiracy to shield the organization from, potentially, murder charges. His actions here constitute direct criminal intentments manifested through the successful destruction of evidence designed to sabotage the state's case.
The most crucial piece of forensic evidence here were the caretaker logs. These were daily journals kept by the Sea Org staff monitoring McPherson. What did they contain that made them so dangerous?
These logs were the smoking gun. They established the timeline of neglect. They detailed her descent, her refusal of food and water, her physical wasting, and most damningly, they likely contained records of direct orders from medical officers or high-level executives to continue withholding outside medical care. They proved knowledge and conscious inaction.
And Rathbun admitted to getting rid of these logs.
Yes. In sworn testimony and public admissions in 2009, he stated that he personally instructed staff to destroy the logs for the final 3 days of her life, the most critical period right before she died. His stated goal was, and I'm quoting, to sanitize the record before turning the partial files over to law enforcement.
And the implication of that act of spoliation is devastating for justice.
It's the reason the organization initially escaped accountability. The destruction of those key final logs made it impossible for the prosecution to prove the specific minute-by-minute timeline of negligent homicide required for a jury conviction. The state attorney pursued criminal charges, but they were ultimately forced to drop them in 2000 because Rathbun's successful evidence destruction had crippled their case.
But beyond just destroying evidence, Rathbun also orchestrated a parallel, very powerful legal strategy.
The weaponization of the First Amendment.
He transformed medical neglect into a constitutional issue.
Precisely. Rathbun's defense team aggressively framed McPherson's confinement and the withholding of care not as medical negligence, but as a religious ritual, the introspection rundown.
So by categorizing it as a religious practice?
They argued that courts could not legally criminalize a religious ritual without violating the First Amendment, and that maneuver shifted the entire legal battleground from a simple homicide case to this complex constitutional challenge, which further complicated the prosecution's path.
The sources also provide testimony from a former high-ranking executive, Jesse Prince. He detailed the decision-making process during those 17 days.
Right. Prince alleged that Rathbun, David Miscavige, and Ray Mithoff, who was the senior case supervisor, met regularly for review meetings to discuss McPherson's worsening condition in room 174. This testimony suggests that Rathbun was fully aware of her profound decline.
And Prince's core allegation is perhaps the most difficult part of the source material.
It is. Prince testified that they sat mute and watched her die to avoid the catastrophic public relations scandal that a hospital admission would have caused. This suggests the decision to prioritize institutional survival over a human life led directly to the decision to withhold care. So Rathbun wasn't merely covering up a death. He was allegedly party to the knowing inaction that caused it. A critical distinction.
It's crucial to understand that even as Rathbun was successfully neutralizing these external threats, the internal mechanism of control was tightening. The violence he perfected outwardly was now turning inward against the church's own top management at the International Gold Base near Hemet, California.
This is the phase where Rathbun's dual nature is just fully exposed. He was now administering terror against executives who were his peers, often just hours after surviving violence from Miscavige himself. This environment was designed to pit victim against victim. Survival depended on administering the leader's will.
And the most infamous physical manifestation of this was the hole. This wasn't a formal prison, was it?
Not at all. The hole started to take shape around 2004. It was physically constructed out of 2 double-wide trailers on the Gold Base property that were just hastily converted from offices into a maximum security containment facility.
And who was it for?
It was for executives who had critically failed David Miscavige, and the conditions were designed purely for psychological and physical degradation.
How many people were in there at a time?
The number could range from 80 to 100 people. They slept shoulder to shoulder on the floor, often in shifts. They were fed extremely meager rations, described consistently in the source material as slop, and the windows were either barred or modified to prevent escape.
And the atmosphere inside?
A pressure cooker. It was designed to break their will through constant high-pressure group confessions and the pervasive, explicit threat of violence. Executives were forced to confess perceived transgressions, often standing for 12 or 16 hours straight, just enduring relentless interrogation and humiliation.
And numerous defectors.
Yeah.
Mike Rinder, Tom DeVote, Amy Scobie. They all say Miscavige was the primary physical aggressor, but Rathbun was crucial.
He was the bad cop. He was the necessary enforcer who physically administered or ensured Miscavige's violent orders were carried out. He created the culture of terror.
But the irony is that Rathbun, the second most powerful man, was himself a victim of this.
That's the core pathology of this total institution. No one was safe. The source notes a specific incident where Miscavige physically assaulted Rathbun. It says he pushed his head against a wall and slapped him hard across his left ear because Miscavige felt Rathbun wasn't being tough enough on the staff in the hole.
So that trauma reinforces the need for Rathbun to administer equal or greater violence.
To demonstrate loyalty, to demonstrate toughness, he had to prove he was still worthy of being the enforcer.
Okay, let's get into the specific, detailed allegations of physical battery from the source material. This is vital for the criminological record.
We have extensive testimony, particularly from Mike Rinder, Tom DeVote, and Amy Scobie.
Let's start with Rinder. He was the chief spokesperson.
Rinder alleges he was subjected to beatings approximately 50 times by Miscavige over this period, and Rathbun's involvement was often direct participation. He was present during many of the assaults and would physically intimidate or restrain Rinder, locking the door, making sure Rinder couldn't escape, to enforce submission. Rinder characterized the assaults as random and whimsical, often triggered by something minor, like a delayed answer.
Next, Tom DeVote, who managed construction at the base.
DeVote was very clear in his testimony. He witnessed Miscavige strike staff over 100 times in that toxic environment, and he specifically identified Rathbun as physically assaulting him during these high-pressure interrogations about construction delays.
And DeVote said there was a kind of survival imperative.
Yes, he said the psychological state was so broken that the underlying imperative was, if I don't attack, I'm going to be attacked. Rathbun was just enacting this survival mechanism.
And we also have the account about Norman Starkey, a veteran executive.
Amy Scobie witnessed this. She testified that Rathbun became enraged and pushed Norman Starkey, who was a venerable, older executive, to the floor with enough force to injure his back.
But we should add the nuance here.
Yes. Starkey, who is still an active member, denies this assault. And that's a common pattern, consistent with current members shielding the leadership and the organization from any accountability.
This all culminates in the musical chairs incident. It encapsulates the pure psychological torture of this regime. And Rathbun himself later described this as the turning point that led to his defection.
It's arguably the most grotesque and bizarre session detailed in the source material. Miscavige and Rathbun orchestrated this game inside the hole. The setup was designed for maximum anxiety and degradation. Miscavige announced that only a select few of the executives could stay at the base.
And the rest would be, banished?
Permanently offloaded to remote camps, separating them from their families indefinitely. They were then forced to physically fight for a limited number of chairs.
Literally fighting for chairs.
Yes, and according to the accounts, it was to the tune of Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody. These high-ranking, dignified executives, the supposed spiritual leaders of a global movement, were forced to brawl savagely, throwing punches, wrestling on the floor just to secure a chair.
Bohemian Rhapsody, that detail is just unbelievably bizarre. Why that song?
The reports focus less on the musical choice itself and more on the effect. The rapid shift from institutional decorum to animalistic violence was intended to strip them of all dignity and agency. It made them desperate and dependent entirely on Miscavige's arbitrary favor.
And Rathbun was watching this.
He was. And having been demoted to the hole himself by this point, he described watching these executives descend into madness brawling like children just to please the leader as the critical psychological break. He realized the entire system was fundamentally corrupted and fueled by terror, and that trauma was the catalyst for his escape and defection in 2004. So Rathbun escapes the international base in 2004, and this next phase marks his transition from being the master enforcer to being a victim. He's now enduring the very same fair game mechanisms he had spent decades perfecting.
The institutional machine now deployed its full weight on its former commander.
Exactly. And after his defection, Rathbun remained quiet for several years. But he reemerged in 2009 as a key source for the St. Petersburg Times series, The Truth Rundown. This public revelation was pivotal.
It was a seismic shift for the public narrative.
It was the first time an official of Rathbun's seniority had publicly corroborated the pervasive, graphic culture of violence at the highest levels. He admitted to striking staff members himself, but, critically, he framed his past violence as a direct product of the coercive environment created and enforced by David Miscavige.
So he became the crucial eyewitness who shattered the leader's image.
He provided specific first-hand accounts of Miscavige's physical assaults, corroborating the claims of Rinder, Devote, and others. His confession provided the institutional confirmation that had been missing for so long.
And the organization's response was immediate and overwhelming. A full-scale, fair-game operation against his private home in Texas, carried out by a group calling themselves the Squirrel Busters.
This campaign is a textbook, modern-day example of organized stalking and institutionalized psychological warfare. The organization committed enormous resources to this one target.
Let's detail the operational specifics of the harassment because it really demonstrates the sophisticated nature of the retaliation.
Okay, so they rented a house immediately adjacent to the Rathbun property in Texas. This wasn't a temporary protest. This was sustained long-term surveillance. They installed professional, high-powered video cameras trained specifically on the Rathbun property 24/7.
And they had teams of people there.
Teams of Scientologists wearing customized Squirrel Busters t-shirts followed Mark and his wife Monique Rathbun constantly, in golf carts, on foot, driving past their home repeatedly.
And the psychological objective was constant stress and provocation.
They continuously filmed the couple, shouting insults and deliberately trying to provoke a physical altercation. The objective was twofold: create relentless psychological stress, and second, manufacture evidence of Mark Rathbun committing battery or losing his temper, which they could then use for PR assassination or even criminal charges.
And this relentless, organized harassment finally forced his wife, Monique Rathbun, who was not a Scientologist, to file a major lawsuit in Texas in 2013.
Right, and the complaint detailed what it called ruthlessly aggressive misconduct. This lawsuit is one of the most documented cases of modern fair game in a legal context. The harassment went so far beyond mere protesting, it was targeted, specific, and designed to destroy her marriage and her professional life.
We have to highlight the graphic and specific details of the harassment campaign aimed at Monique, as documented in her complaint.
The source material outlines several profoundly invasive and malicious acts. For example, a sex toy was mailed directly to Monique Rathbun's workplace, just intended for maximum humiliation and professional scandal.
And they tried to sabotage her marriage.
In a separate attempt, flowers with a romantic message, purportedly from Monique, were sent to a female coworker. It was specifically designed to cause scandal, damage her relationship with her husband, or just get her fired from her job.
And the defamation targeted her fundamental identity.
Yes. The institutional websites launched a dedicated defamation campaign against Monique. They published claims that she was a sexual pervert and, disturbingly, a man who had a secret sex change operation. This is a level of malicious character assassination designed to completely isolate the victim. And the fact that they financed a private investigator to lease a home across the street to monitor their every move for 3 years, it just shows the resources they committed to crushing one family.
And, crucially, the Texas courts initially sided with Monique.
They did. The courts initially ruled in her favor, rejecting the church's attempts to dismiss the case. The judge stated explicitly that the harassment, including the sexualized defamatory attacks, was not protected speech. It confirmed that the organization had far exceeded the bounds of acceptable protest.
Okay, so here is where the narrative takes its most baffling and frankly heartbreaking turn. After years of fighting as a committed whistleblower, enduring the squirrel busters, and successfully advancing this major lawsuit, Mark Rathbun's posture abruptly changed in 2016.
This reversal provides a stark demonstration that escape from a high-control total institution is rarely absolute. The institutional reach is long, financial coercion is immensely powerful, and the psychological pressure is relentless, even against someone who spent decades mastering those very mechanisms himself.
So in May 2016, Monique Rathbun's major lawsuit was suddenly dismissed, was the public explanation.
Monique abruptly fired her legal team and filed a motion to dismiss her lawsuit with prejudice, which means the case can never be refiled. Her official, very carefully worded statement was that they had effectively achieved the primary purpose of the lawsuit.
Which, as you said earlier, is standard code in these kinds of legal battles.
It's widely understood in legal and investigative circles to mean a massive, confidential financial settlement. Given that the church was spending millions to fight this case in Texas and was facing a high probability of losing a devastating jury trial, a substantial payout conditioned on silence is really the only logical conclusion.
But not just silence.
No. Conditioned on silence, cessation of all criticism, and the active disruption of former allies. It was a negotiated financial peace, likely covering the medical and psychological toll of years of harassment.
And the most disturbing aspect of this reversal is what happened immediately after the dismissal.
Right. Rathbun began publishing videos and blog posts that targeted his former allies and fellow whistleblowers, specifically Mike Rinder and the actress Leah Remini.
He didn't just go silent. He started mirroring the exact propaganda of the organization he'd spent 7 years fighting.
Exactly. The narrative shift was immediate and dramatic. He began characterizing the anti-Scientology movement and shows like Scientology and the aftermath as self-serving, money-making schemes. He directly attacked Remini's credibility and Rinder's integrity, suggesting that the abuse accounts which he himself had previously corroborated with his own eyewitness testimony, were exaggerated or fabricated for profit.
And that serves a clear institutional purpose, doesn't it?
It's the classic defense mechanism. Sow distrust among victims and witnesses. When the highest-ranking whistleblower turns against his former allies, it gives the institution invaluable material to discredit all other critics as financially motivated or unreliable. It creates confusion.
So criminologists and analysts have provided 3 primary theories for this radical shift.
Each one is rooted in the coercive tactics that Rathbun himself had perfected.
Okay, let's start with the most pragmatic theory, the grand settlement.
That theory is based purely on financial coercion and legal analysis. It suggests a massive, untraceable financial payout, perhaps multi-million dollars, was conditioned on 2 explicit requirements: ceasing all personal criticism and critically actively disrupting the critical community by targeting high-profile figures like Rinder and Remini. He was paid not just for his silence, but for his active betrayal.
The second theory is based on leverage, the blackmail techniques Rathbun mastered.
Correct. Rathbun was the Inspector General for decades. He knows where all the bodies are buried, but he also knows about his own past actions, destroying evidence in the McPherson case, battery against subordinates, the specifics of the PI work. The organization may have obtained specific leverage, the black PR he knows how to manufacture, to force his compliance, so he couldn't reopen the door to his own whistleblowing without facing legal or reputational ruin himself.
And the third theory is the most psychologically complex, the idea of incomplete deconversion.
Or psychological reintegration. The pressure of 7 years of constant legal and physical harassment may have just broken his resistance. It suggested that Rathbun may have never fully deconverted from the core ideology of L. Ron Hubbard, only from the leadership of David Miscavige. The negotiated peace, the settlement, allowed him to reestablish a form of psychological stability and end the war, accepting the organization's terms just for the sake of survival. This final dramatic reversal is perhaps the greatest evidence of how exceptionally difficult it is to truly escape a total institution.
This has been a profoundly complex and disturbing journey. As we synthesize Rathbun's entire life, the central contradiction is just stark. Mark Rathbun was the pivotal enforcer who personally directed institutional violence, ordering the destruction of evidence and the death of Lisa McPherson in Clearwater, overseeing her confinement in room 174, beating subordinates like Rinder and Devote at the Gold Base near Hemet, and masterminding lawfare against critics like Can and Robert Minton.
Yet we have the documented forensic fact that he and his wife Monique were subjected to the most vicious iteration of the very machinery he perfected. They endured the Squirrel Busters operation in Texas, the 247 surveillance, and the graphic campaign of defamation targeting Monique's identity. Rathbun constructed the machine, and ultimately he was subjected to its most powerful, relentless application.
His life serves as a definitive case study in the corrosive power of unaccountable authority. The timeline shows a continuum of institutional violence, shielded by the very structures Rathbun helped put into place: the RTC, the religious defense, the successful spoliation of evidence.
And Rathbun's inability to find lasting peace outside of the organization, culminating in that confidential settlement and the subsequent betrayal of his allies, is a testament to the long reach of the institution he helped build. The prison of belief, when it's reinforced by immense legal and financial coercion, has an exceptionally long and destructive reach.
So as we synthesize Rathbun's entire life, the crucial question for us to consider isn't just how he performed these acts, but what his eventual failure to find lasting peace tells us about the limits of law enforcement. We have seen how the legal system, the IRS, the destruction of Can, the McPherson case, Monique's lawsuit, was exploited or neutralized by the aggressive use of financial power and the claim of religious protection.
And this raises a vital question for us to consider. When a high control group successfully uses civil laws and religious protections to shield itself from criminal liability for acts that fundamentally involve felony obstruction of justice, battery, and negligent homicide, what practical avenues remain for investigators, prosecutors, and the victims themselves to find true accountability and justice outside of a massive financial settlement? The legal shield, which Rathbun perfected, often proves impenetrable even to the most determined victims.